In the distant future, Earth was no longer the dominant force in the universe. After centuries of wars, exploration, and the rise of other powerful species, humans had learned to adapt and survive. Now they roamed across distant planets, scavenging the ruins of the old Earth, looking for anything useful to trade or sell. Ilya, a young girl, was one of them. Ilya was small for her age, but she had learned how to survive in a world full of dangers. She had grown up in the decaying cities, learning the harsh ways of life from the older scavengers. Her companions were tough, but they often underestimated her. They didn't see the fire inside her, the fire that made her stronger than anyone thought. One day, Ilya and her team set out for another scavenging mission. The skies above were a thick, smoky gray, and the air was still, carrying with it the faint scent of burning metal and dust. They traveled through the wastelands of what used to be a thriving metropolis. The remains of tall buildings jutted from the earth like broken bones. The world around them was a mess of ruined technology, forgotten cities, and strange, wild creatures that had evolved in the absence of human control. As Ilya walked alongside the group, her eyes darted back and forth, constantly scanning the environment for anything that could pose a threat. The dangers of this world were many, but none more terrifying than the Granoth, a massive dragon-like predator that roamed the forests and mountains. Its scales were as hard as steel, its eyes glowed a fiery orange, and its breath could melt stone. The Granoth was a creature of legend, feared by every species across the galaxy. Ilya, stay close, warned Jarek, one of her older companions, as they walked. The Granoth could be nearby. You don't want to get caught by one of those beasts. Ilya nodded, but she wasn't afraid. She had heard the stories about the Granoth, how it was unstoppable, how no one dared to fight it. But Ilya had a different perspective on things. In her mind, she saw it not as a monster, but as a creature that simply wanted to survive. Just like her. The team continued their journey through the wasteland, the air growing heavier with each step. Suddenly they heard a sound, a deep rumbling growl that shook the ground beneath their feet. Ilya froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. The sound was unmistakable. A Granoth was nearby. Move. Jarek hissed, his voice sharp with panic. Get to cover now. The group scattered, finding shelter behind the ruins of a collapsed building. Ilya, however, was too curious to hide. She crouched behind a rusted piece of metal and peered out, trying to catch a glimpse of the creature. That's when she saw it. The Granoth was enormous, far bigger than she had imagined. Its body was covered in thick, dark scales that shimmered like polished obsidian. Its wings were tucked at its sides, but she could see the massive claws and teeth glinting in the dim light. The creature's eyes, bright like two fiery suns, were scanning the area, and Ilya could feel the intense heat radiating from its body. But something was wrong. The Granoth wasn't moving with its usual grace. It was thrashing its head, clearly in pain, and letting out a low, mournful growl. Ilya's curiosity took over. Despite the danger, she couldn't help but watch. She could see the creature's nostrils flaring, as though it was struggling to breathe. There was something lodged inside one of them, a large, sharp thorn. The Granoth's growls became more frantic, and it banged its massive head against the ground in a desperate attempt to remove whatever was blocking its airways. Ilya watched with wide eyes. She had heard stories about the Granoth's power and ferocity, but never had she imagined seeing it like this. The mighty beast, a force of nature, was vulnerable. Ilya felt a surge of empathy. The creature was suffering. She didn't know why, but something inside her urged her to help. This wasn't the kind of world where humans could afford to be weak. If she stood by and did nothing, who would be the next to suffer? I can help it, she whispered to herself, even though she knew it sounded insane. Before she could think twice, she stood up and moved cautiously toward the Granoth. Her heart was racing, but her steps were steady. Her mind was focused, determined. She had never done anything like this before, but she knew she couldn't just stand by. The creature's eyes snapped toward her as she approached, and for a moment, Ilya froze. The Granoth stared at her, its fiery gaze piercing through the distance. Ilya's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't back away. She knew it could kill her with a single swipe of its claw, but somehow she didn't feel afraid. The Granoth seemed to study her for a long, tense moment. Then slowly, it stopped thrashing and lowered its massive head to the ground as though giving her permission to come closer. Ilya took a tentative step forward, then another. She could feel the heat coming off the creature's body, but it didn't seem to be threatening her anymore. She reached the Granoth's nostril and saw the thorn lodge deep inside. It was thick and jagged, its sharp edges gleaming in the dim light. Ilya didn't hesitate. She reached out with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she grasped the thorn. With a quick, sharp tug, she pulled it free. The Granoth let out a loud, relieved exhale, and Ilya stumbled back, barely avoiding the blast of air that shot from its nostrils. The creature shook its head as if testing its newfound freedom. Its fiery eyes met hers again, but this time, there was no anger in them. Instead, there was something different, something like gratitude. Without warning, the Granoth lowered its head further, resting it gently on the ground in front of her. It was offering something, though Ilya wasn't sure what. The moment felt surreal. She had removed a thorn from a creature that could easily have killed her, and now it was showing her respect. She couldn't explain it, but she knew this was a turning point. The Granoth would never forget her. "Come on," Jarek's voice called from behind her, dragging her out of her daze. "We need to get out of here before it decides we're dinner." Ilya turned to leave, but the Granoth made no move to stop her. It simply watched, its fiery eyes following her every step. The bond between them had been forged, whether either of them understood it or not. And from that moment on, Ilya's life would never be the same. Ilya's life had always been unpredictable, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened after she removed the thorn from the Granoth's nostrils. The bond that formed between them, though mysterious, was undeniable. As she left the creature behind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air around her. The Granoth wasn't just a terrifying predator. It was something more, something that had recognized her as more than just a human. For days, the creature followed her. At first, it stayed at a distance, always lurking on the edges of her group's camp, its massive form hidden by the trees. The other scavengers noticed it, of course, but most of them simply ignored it, too afraid to confront the beast. Some even suggested they leave the area, believing it might attack at any moment. But Ilya couldn't bring herself to leave. There was something in the creature's gaze that made her think it wouldn't harm her. "Ilya," Jarek called one morning, his voice gruff and serious. "The Granoth's been watching us for days. You're not afraid? It could attack any time." Ilya was sitting near a small fire, warming her hands as the sun began to rise. She looked up at Jarek, shaking her head. "It's not going to attack. I've seen it." "It's different," Jarek frowned, clearly worried, but didn't argue. He'd known Ilya long enough to realize when she was determined about something. But even he couldn't understand how she could trust a beast like that. The Granoth had a reputation across the galaxy, a reputation for terror and destruction. No one had ever been brave enough to get close to one, let alone help it. As the days passed, the creature began to draw closer to their camp, never once showing aggression. It seemed to study them from a distance, its glowing eyes always watching Ilya. At night, Ilya would sometimes hear its growls, but they were soft, almost like a low murmur, as if the Granoth was trying to communicate in a way that wasn't violent. One evening, as Ilya and her companions packed up their camp to move to a new location, she noticed the Granoth standing just at the edge of the forest. Its massive body was silhouetted against the fading sunlight. Ilya could feel its presence, and it made her heart race with a mix of fear and excitement. "Are you sure we should keep moving?" Jarek asked, his voice full of concern. "That thing's too close. It could be waiting for the right moment." Ilya turned to him, her gaze firm. "No, it's not. I'm sure of it." Just as the group was about to leave, something unexpected happened. A group of hostile scavengers, led by a ruthless warlord named Volrak, emerged from the shadows. They were armed with weapons that could kill in an instant. Ilya's heart sank as she saw them approach, but her first instinct was to protect her companions. She grabbed her weapon, a small rusty blaster she had scavenged months ago, and stood ready. Volrak's eyes were cold and calculating as he looked over Ilya's group. "You've got something we need," he said, his voice a low growl. "We'll take everything you've got and you'll come with us." The other scavengers raised their weapons, clearly not afraid of the group of humans. Ilya knew she had to act fast. She pointed her blaster at Volrak, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The odds were against them. Then, from the edge of the camp, a massive roar shook the air. The Granoth had emerged from the forest. It was a terrifying sight as it charged toward them, its wings unfurled and its massive claws digging into the ground with each step. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and the scavengers froze in fear. "Move!" Volrak shouted to his men, but it was too late. The Granoth was already on them. The beast was a force of nature. It moved like a storm, unpredictable and fierce. With a single swipe of its enormous claws, it sent two of Volrak's men flying into the trees. The Granoth's roar echoed across the forest, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. Ilya's heart raced as she watched the creature charge, but she didn't run. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on the Granoth. It was like everything had come full circle. She had removed the thorn from its nostrils, and now it was protecting her. The Granoth's fiery eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything went silent. The battle raged around them, but in that moment it was just her and the beast. The Granoth seemed to hesitate, as if waiting for something. Ilya took a deep breath, her hand still on the blaster. She knew what she had to do. "Stop," she called out, her voice strong but calm. "It's not their fault. Let them go." The Granoth paused, its eyes never leaving hers. Then slowly it lowered its head, a low growl rumbling in its throat as it looked at the humans on the ground. The remaining scavengers scrambled to get up, but the Granoth made no move to harm them. Instead, it turned away, its massive body blocking their path, forcing them to retreat. Volrak's face twisted with fury. "You think you've won, girl? You'll regret this." He turned and fled, signaling his men to follow. The Granoth didn't chase them. It simply watched as they disappeared into the trees. Ilya couldn't believe what had just happened. The Granoth, a creature of legend, had protected them. She turned to her companions, who were equally stunned. Jarek, his face pale, could hardly speak. "That was incredible," he managed to say. Ilya nodded, her heart still pounding. She had done it. The Granoth had saved them. But more than that, it had chosen her. It had recognized her as someone who could understand it, someone worthy of its trust. From that moment on, Ilya and the Granoth were inseparable. Wherever she went, the beast followed, its massive form moving silently through the trees. It didn't need to be commanded. It simply knew that she was its protector, just as it was hers. At night, the creature would stand guard around their camp, its fiery eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. And during the day, it would move alongside them, keeping a watchful eye over Ilya and her companions. Ilya had never felt safer. The Granoth had become more than just a beast. It was her shield, her protector. In a world where danger lurked around every corner, she knew she had something no one else did, a creature that would stand by her side no matter the odds. But as the days passed, Ilya began to realize that the Granoth wasn't just a shield against physical threats. The creature was also something more, something she didn't fully understand. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was still hope, that even the most terrifying creatures could be allies if you reached out to them. And that was something she would never forget. Ilya had always been a survivor. From the moment she had been born in the decaying ruins of old Earth, she learned to adapt to the harsh world around her. Life had never been easy. But now, with the Granoth, her unlikely shield, by her side, she felt stronger than ever before. The bond between them was growing deeper, unspoken yet undeniable. The creature, once a terrifying beast, was now her protector. But with this new bond came new challenges. As the days passed, Ilya and her companions traveled across the wilderness, constantly on the move, searching for new places to scavenge. The presence of the Granoth made life easier in some ways, but harder in others. Their group was no longer just a band of scavengers, they were now a target. Word had spread quickly throughout the galaxy about the girl and the dragon-like creature that had become her shield. People, both friendly and hostile, were beginning to take notice. Ilya's old life, the quiet days of scavenging and surviving, felt like a distant memory. Now every day was filled with uncertainty. The Granoth's presence kept the worst of the threats at bay, but it also made them a target for more dangerous enemies. One evening, as Ilya sat beside the campfire, the Granoth standing tall nearby, she saw Jarek approaching her with a serious expression. He didn't speak right away, just stared at the creature as if unsure how to act. "Ilya," he said at last, his voice low. "We can't keep running forever. Sooner or later, someone's going to come after us. That thing. It's not just a guardian. It's a weapon, and weapons attract attention." Ilya glanced up at the Granoth, its massive body casting a long shadow in the firelight. The creature's fiery eyes were fixed on the horizon, as though it sensed danger in the air. For a moment she felt a pang of doubt. Jarek was right. There was no hiding from the attention the Granoth drew. It was too powerful, too legendary. No one would leave them in peace for long. But despite the dangers, Ilya shook her head, her gaze hardening. "I can't leave it behind, Jarek. It saved us. It saved me. I won't abandon it. Jarek sighed, clearly frustrated but understanding. He knew Ilya was stubborn, and when she made up her mind, there was no changing it. I know, he said quietly. I just don't want you to get hurt. Ilya nodded, grateful for his concern but also resolute. She had a responsibility now, not just to herself but to the creature that had chosen her. The Granoth had become more than just an ally. It was a part of her, a piece of her own strength. The next day, their group continued its journey. But as they moved deeper into the wildlands, Ilya couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The trees around them grew thicker, the air heavier, and the sounds of the wilderness seemed to take on a more ominous tone. That afternoon, as the group rested in a small clearing, Ilya noticed something strange. The Granoth was no longer standing guard. It was lying on the ground, its head low, its fiery eyes flickering with what seemed like discomfort. Ilya, Eric said, his voice filled with warning. Something's wrong. Before Ilya could respond, there was a loud crack from the trees. The Granoth shot up to its feet, its body tense, its eyes wide with alertness. And then they saw them. A group of heavily armed soldiers emerged from the forest, their weapons drawn. They were dressed in black armor, their faces hidden behind visors. Ilya's heart skipped a beat. She recognized them immediately. These were no ordinary scavengers. These were elite soldiers, trained and armed for combat. And they were here for one thing, the Granoth. Ilya, move! Jarek shouted, pulling her to her feet. Get to cover! But it was too late. The soldiers had already surrounded them, weapons aimed at Ilya and her group. The leader, a tall man with cold eyes, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tense silence. You're the one with the Granoth, he said, his tone more of a statement than a question. You will come with us. The creature belongs to the Empire now. Ilya's blood ran cold. The Empire. She had heard rumors about them, an authoritarian force that sought to control every powerful creature in the galaxy. If they had come for the Granoth, that could only mean one thing. They wanted to weaponize it. The Granoth growled, a deep, rumbling sound that shook the ground beneath their feet. Its fiery eyes locked onto the soldiers, and Ilya felt a rush of fear mixed with determination. The creature was ready to fight, but so were they. I won't let you take it, Ilya said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. The soldier's lips curled into a cold smile. You have no choice, girl. Surrender now, and we'll make this quick. Without warning, the Granoth lunged forward, its massive claws slashing through the air. The soldiers fired, but the creature's thick scales absorbed the blasts. It was like trying to pierce steel with a wooden stick. The soldiers scrambled, trying to retreat, but the Granoth was too fast. It was an unstoppable force. Ilya didn't hesitate. She knew the Granoth would fight, but it was up to her to protect the others. She grabbed her blaster and fired at one of the soldiers, taking him down with a clean shot to the chest. The remaining soldiers turned to face her, but they were too focused on the Granoth. It didn't take long for the battle to reach its peak. The Granoth was unstoppable, its attacks swift and deadly. The soldiers had no chance against its raw power. But just as it seemed like victory was within reach, a loud, piercing whistle cut through the air. From the trees, more soldiers appeared, their numbers overwhelming. Retreat! Ilya shouted, realizing they were outnumbered. But as the soldiers closed in, the Granoth stood tall, roaring defiantly. It would not let them take Ilya. In that moment, Ilya understood something crucial. The creature was no longer just a beast. It was a symbol of resistance, of strength, of defiance, and she was its shield. She had been chosen, not by chance, but by fate. I won't let them take you, Ilya whispered, her heart swelling with a new sense of purpose. We'll fight together. The battle raged on, but with each passing moment, Ilya and the Granoth grew stronger. They were a team, an unstoppable force, and together they would face whatever came next. The days after the battle with the Empire's soldiers were tense. Ilya and the Granoth had narrowly escaped, but their lives had changed forever. The Empire would not forget their defeat so easily. It wasn't just a matter of capturing a creature. It was about power, control, and the message they needed to send to the galaxy. And they were willing to do anything to get what they wanted. Ilya knew they couldn't stay in the same place for long. The Empire's forces were vast, and they would search for them relentlessly. It wasn't just the soldiers they had to worry about. It was the bounty hunters, mercenaries, and spies who worked for the highest bidder. Word about the Granoth had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The creature was a living weapon, and everyone wanted a piece of it. As Ilya and her group traveled deeper into the wilderness, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They were being followed. She could feel it in the air. But who could be tracking them? The soldiers? Or perhaps someone else? That night, as the camp settled into a quiet routine, Ilya was restless. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, her mind racing. The Granoth lay nearby, its massive form still and watchful. It had been unusually calm these past few days, almost as if it knew something she didn't. "Get some rest," Jarek said, his voice softer than usual. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Ilya shook her head. "I can't. I feel like we're being watched." Jarek sat down beside her, his face creased with concern. "I know, I feel it too. But we've been keeping a low profile. We can't outrun them forever, Ilya. Sooner or later, we'll have to make a stand." Ilya nodded, her fingers tightly gripping the handle of her blaster. She didn't want to fight again, but she knew it might be inevitable. They were running out of options. The next morning, the group continued their journey, but Ilya's unease grew. She kept checking the sky, the trees, the ground. Everything seemed normal, but the feeling of being followed only intensified. And then, as they passed through a dense thicket, disaster struck. A loud explosion rang out from behind them, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Ilya whirled around, her heart racing, just in time to see smoke rising from the direction they had come. Before she could react, a group of armed figures appeared from the trees. But these weren't soldiers. They were humans, and they were wearing the insignia of the Empire. More specifically, they were bounty hunters. "We've been looking for you, Ilya," one of the men called out, his voice cold and confident. "The Empire has a reward for your little pet, and you're coming with us." Ilya's blood ran cold. She knew immediately what this meant. The bounty hunters weren't just after the Granoth, they were after her too. They had found them. "You don't understand," Ilya said, her voice tight with fear and anger. "I won't let you take it. I won't let you take us." The Granoth growled low in its throat, sensing the threat before Ilya had even spoken. It rose to its feet, its massive form towering over them all. Its fiery eyes blazed with anger, and it prepared to fight. But Ilya stepped forward, holding up her hand. "Wait," she said, trying to calm the creature. "I'll handle this." But just as she was about to speak, something unexpected happened. One of the bounty hunters, someone she hadn't noticed before, stepped forward, his face hidden behind a black mask. He wasn't armed like the others. Instead, he was holding something in his hands. A small device, a strange kind of collar glowing faintly with blue energy. The man smiled coldly as he activated the collar. The moment he did, the Granoth froze, its body seizing up as if an invisible force had gripped it. Ilya gasped in horror. "What are you doing?" she shouted, rushing forward. "Let it go." The man didn't respond. Instead, he simply walked closer to the creature, holding the collar in front of it. The Granoth let out a strangled growl, trying to fight against the collar's power, but it was no use. The collar was designed to subdue even the most powerful of creatures, and the Granoth, despite its immense strength, was struggling to break free. Ilya's heart pounded in her chest. The collar. It was a device meant to control the creature, to turn it into nothing more than a weapon. And she realized too late that the bounty hunters hadn't just found them, they had been tipped off. Someone had sold them out. Her gaze flicked over to Jarek, who was standing a few paces away, his face pale. He was the only one who could have done it. The only one who knew about their past, about the places they had been, the things they had seen. She felt the truth crash down on her like a wave. "Jarek," she whispered, the betrayal clear in her voice. You sold us out?" Yarek's face twisted with guilt, but he didn't deny it. "I had no choice, Ilya. The Empire promised me safety. They promised me a future, and I needed the money. You don't understand. I was trying to protect you." Ilya's heart shattered. The person she had trusted the most, the person who had always been by her side, had betrayed her. She had never imagined it would come to this. Her eyes burned with anger and sadness, but there was no time for grief. The Granoth was still struggling, still fighting against the collar's power. Without thinking, Ilya charged toward Jarek, fury and heartbreak driving her forward. "You coward!" she shouted, her voice raw with emotion. "How could you betray me like this?" Jarek stepped back, looking almost as broken as she felt. "I didn't want to do this. But I couldn't let the Empire take everything. I couldn't let them use us as pawns." "Enough!" the masked man shouted, his voice sharp. "Get her under control." In an instant, the bounty hunters moved to subdue her, their weapons raised. But Ilya wasn't going down without a fight. She grabbed her blaster, her hands shaking but steady as she fired at the nearest enemy. The shot hit him square in the chest, but there were too many of them. She had no choice but to run. The Granoth, still struggling against the collar, let out a roar of defiance, and with one final, powerful charge, it broke free from the device's hold. But it was too late. The hunters were already closing in, and the Granoth was no longer the untamable beast it had once been. It was a weapon, now controlled by the Empire, and it was going to be used against them all. The world around Ilya felt like it was crumbling. Betrayed by someone she trusted, surrounded by enemies she couldn't outrun, and with the Granoth, her protector, no longer under her control, the weight of the situation was almost too much to bear. But even in her darkest moment, Ilya refused to give up. The bounty hunters, led by the masked man who had activated the collar, were closing in. The Granoth, now chained and under the influence of the Empire's control, stood motionless. Its fiery eyes, once full of rage and life, now appeared dull, almost lifeless. Ilya could see the beast was struggling, its massive body trembling with the effort to break free, but the collar was strong and the power it held over the creature was overwhelming. "Don't give up," Ilya whispered to the Granoth, her voice filled with desperation. "Please don't let them win." She looked over at Jarek, who stood a few feet away, his face twisted with guilt. The betrayal in his eyes was evident, and Ilya's heart ached at the sight of him. She couldn't understand how he could have done it. How could he have sold them out after everything they'd been through? "Ilya," Jarek said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted this. I didn't want to hurt you, but the Empire, they gave me a choice. I thought it was the only way to survive." Ilya stared at him, her anger flaring, but there was no time to argue. The Granoth was still struggling against the collar, and they were running out of time. The bounty hunters were getting closer. "I don't want your excuses, Jarek," she snapped, her voice full of fire. "You betrayed us, and now I have to fix this. But I'll never forgive you." Before Jarek could respond, the leader of the bounty hunters, the masked man, stepped forward, his cold gaze locking with Ilya's. "Enough," he said sharply. "We're taking you both back to the Empire." No more running. Ilya didn't move. She couldn't. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the danger, the loss, was heavy on her heart. But in that moment, a spark of resolve burned deep inside her. The Granoth hadn't given up yet, and neither would she. She glanced at the creature, her eyes narrowing with determination. "You think you've won?" she asked, her voice steady, almost calm. "You've underestimated us." The bounty hunter leader's eyes narrowed. "You're in no position to threaten us, girl." "I'm not threatening you," Ilya said with a cold smile. "I'm promising you, we're getting out of here." The Granoth let out a low, rumbling growl, its body tensing as if it had heard Ilya's words. For a moment it seemed to recognize the fire in her eyes. The same fire that had driven her to fight for survival from the very beginning. Its eyes flickered, a brief flash of defiance sparking in them. And then it happened. The Granoth roared. The sound was deafening, a primal, thunderous roar that shook the very ground beneath their feet. The chains around its massive body rattled, the collar flickering and sparking with energy. With one powerful movement, the Granoth tore through the chains, breaking free from the collar's control. The bounty hunters scattered in panic, but it was too late. The creature was back, more powerful than ever. "Ilya," Jarek shouted, his voice filled with fear. "You have to run!" But Ilya didn't listen. She stood her ground, eyes locked on the Granoth. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't afraid. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she and the Granoth would finally take control of their fate. With a final roar, the Granoth charged at the bounty hunters. It moved like lightning, its massive claws cutting through the air with deadly precision. The masked leader raised his weapon, but the creature was too fast. In a single, powerful swipe, the Granoth sent the man flying backward, his weapon flying from his hand. The remaining bounty hunters hesitated, unsure of how to respond. They had never faced anything like the Granoth before, but they were trained soldiers and they quickly recovered, drawing their weapons. They fired at the beast, but the Granoth's thick scales absorbed the shots, leaving it unharmed. Ilya grabbed her blaster, taking cover behind a fallen tree, her heart racing. She knew she had to act quickly. The bounty hunters were skilled, and they wouldn't give up easily. She had to outsmart them. She had to— "Ilya!" Yarek's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see him running toward her, his face desperate. "You can't keep fighting. They'll kill you. We need to get out of here." "Not without the Granoth," Ilya said firmly, her voice unwavering. "We're not running anymore, Jarek. It's time to fight." Jarek stopped, his face filled with confusion and fear. "You're insane. You can't win against them. The Empire—" "I'm not going to let the Empire take us," Ilya interrupted, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "We're going to stand and fight, Jarek. And if you're not with us, then you're against us." Jarek looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. And then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "I'm with you." It was all the confirmation Ilya needed. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. She turned back to the battlefield, her eyes locked on the bounty hunters. They were regrouping, readying themselves for another attack. But they didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that Ilya and the Granoth had already won. The bond between them was unbreakable, and they would fight together until the end. The Granoth lunged forward once more, its claws cutting through the air. The bounty hunters tried to fire, but Ilya was already moving. She sprinted toward the remaining enemies, her blaster in hand. The Granoth tore through them, unstoppable. Ilya's heart raced as she fired, hitting one of the hunters square in the chest. It was chaos. Loud, violent, and unstoppable. But in that chaos, Ilya found her purpose. The Granoth was her shield, and she was its warrior. In the end, it was over. The battlefield was silent, the smoke clearing. The Granoth stood tall, its chest heaving, its fiery eyes scanning the aftermath. The bounty hunters lay defeated, and the leader, who had once thought himself untouchable, was now just another casualty in the battle for survival. Ilya stood beside the creature, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. She had done it. They had done it. They had fought back. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, her voice full of awe and gratitude. The Granoth let out a low growl, its eyes softening as it looked down at her. The bond between them was stronger than ever. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the battlefield, Ilya knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a fighter, and with the Granoth by her side, there was nothing in the galaxy that could stand in her way.